The storm in Tampa, a battle of wits and principle. The courthouse in Tampa, Florida, had long been a theater of legal warfare, its oak-paneled walls bearing silent witness to countless disputes. But on this particular morning, no one could have anticipated the tempest that was about to erupt. Judge Alan Prescott, a man whose stern reputation preceded him, thought he could assert his authority with a simple fine and silence the seasoned attorney Pam Bondi. He was wrong, grievously so. What unfolded was not just a clash over a piece of jewelry, but a masterclass in intellect, resilience, and the unyielding defense of principle. Pam Bondi stepped through the courthouse's heavy wooden doors, her presence commanding yet understated. In one hand, she carried a sleek leather briefcase, with the other, she adjusted the lapel of her tailored blazer. She was there for a routine business dispute hearing, one she could argue with her eyes closed. Thanks to years of honed expertise, her mind was already mapping out the case when she felt an unexpected weight, the gaze of Judge Prescott. Known for his no-nonsense demeanor, Prescott wasn't looking at her face. His eyes were locked on a small gold cross hanging just below her collarbone. The air in the room thickened. A quiet stillness settled over the handful of spectators, the bailiff, and the court clerk. Then, with a voice as sharp as a gavel's crack, Prescott leaned forward. "Miss Bondi," he intoned, "I must remind you that religious symbols have no place in my courtroom. Remove that cross. It violates the neutrality of this space, or face a fine." A murmur rippled through the onlookers. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably, and the clerk darted a glance between the judge and Pam. Judges often flexed their authority in idiosyncratic ways. But fining a lawyer over a necklace, that was uncharted territory. Pam didn't blink. "I'm sorry, Your Honor," she replied, her tone steady and unshaken. "But my cross is no different from a wedding ring or a locket with a family photo." Her response was not a reflex of defiance but a calculated opening salvo. She understood the stakes instantly. This wasn't about the cross itself, it was about power, precedent, and the boundaries of personal freedom. Prescott's face remained unreadable, a mask of judicial stoicism. "That's not how I see it," he said, his sigh carrying a hint of exasperation. "Remove it, or I'll issue a fine for disregarding courtroom neutrality." For the first time in her illustrious career, Pam Bondi found herself fined, not for a breach of procedure or an ethical lapse, but for wearing a piece of jewelry. The fine was nominal, a mere slap on the wrist in monetary terms. But its symbolism cut deeper. It was an attempt to bend her will, to enforce compliance through petty diktat. Pam didn't remove the cross. Instead, she folded her hands over her briefcase, her expression cool and composed. She wasn't about to let this pass, not out of stubbornness, but out of a razor-sharp awareness of what was at stake. "Your Honor," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "Before we continue, I'd like to address this issue formally." Prescott raised a brow, his smirk betraying a flicker of amusement as he glanced at the clock. "Miss Bondi, this hearing is about a business dispute, not your personal grievances." Pam didn't flinch. "I'm aware, Your Honor, but the First Amendment doesn't take a recess for personal opinions." That line landed like a thunderclap. Prescott leaned back, his eyes narrowing. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her keyboard, the room teetering on the edge, not over a contract, but over a seasoned attorney challenging a judge's authority to his face. Pam's intelligence, a mind in command. Pam Bondi's response was no impulsive outburst. It was the product of a brilliant legal mind, one that could pivot from a mundane hearing to a constitutional showdown without missing a beat. Her intelligence shone in her ability to see beyond the immediate, a fine over a necklace, and grasp the broader implications, a judge's overreach into personal expression, a potential erosion of rights. She walked a tightrope, knowing that defiance could invite reprisal, yet retreat would signal surrender. Backing down wasn't an option, not because of pride, but because her intellect demanded she protect the principle at play. You're fining me for wearing a cross, she continued, reaching into her briefcase with deliberate precision. Let's break that down legally, shall we? Prescott exhaled, rubbing his temples as if weary of the exchange. But Pam was already in motion. She wasn't just arguing, she was dismantling his premise with surgical precision. She withdrew a single sheet of paper, placing it on the table before her. Every movement was measured, every pause a tightening of the room's tension. Prescott sighed again. Miss Bondi, I don't have time for theatrics. Pam didn't blink. Neither do I, Your Honor. But what I do have is a firm understanding of constitutional law. The judge leaned forward, fingers laced, bracing himself. You're fining me for a cross, claiming it violates courtroom neutrality, she said. Tell me, Your Honor, what legal precedent supports that? Silence fell. The court reporter's fingers froze. The bailiff stood motionless. Prescott let out a slow breath. This courtroom operates under my authority. Miss Bondi. Pam nodded. It does, but that authority isn't above the Constitution. She tapped the paper. Under the First Amendment, personal religious expression is protected, especially when it doesn't disrupt proceedings. Prescott scoffed. You're an attorney, not a law professor. Pam's smile was cold, devoid of warmth. Then let's talk case law, shall we? She lifted the paper. Tinker v. Des Moines, 1969, a landmark case establishing that individuals don't shed their constitutional rights at the door of a government institution, be it a school or a courtroom. Prescott's jaw tightened imperceptibly. He knew the case, every legal professional did. Pam pressed on. West Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnett, 1943, the Supreme Court ruled that compelling someone to hide a symbol of belief violates their First Amendment rights. Shall I continue, Your Honor, or will you reconsider that? Fine. Prescott's misstep. Pride over reason. Judge Prescott's behavior here reveals a critical flaw, an intelligence undermined by hubris. His initial ruling was less a reasoned stance than a knee-jerk assertion of control. He saw the cross not as a neutral symbol of faith, but as a challenge to his dominion, a personal affront he couldn't tolerate. His claim of neutrality was a thin veneer, easily pierced by Pam's logic. A wiser judge might have paused, considered the legal ground beneath his feet, and retreated gracefully. Prescott didn't. His fingers tapped the armrest of his chair, a telltale sign of a man cornered yet unwilling to yield. This isn't a religious debate, Miss Bondi, he snapped. Pam tilted her head. Then why did you make it one? A few gasps broke the silence. Prescott's face darkened, his authority slipping like sand through his fingers. Pam leaned forward, her voice unwavering. With all due respect, Your Honor, I'll stop when I receive a legal justification for this fine, because so far, I haven't heard one. The pause that followed was excruciating. Prescott finally glanced at the clerk. Mark the fine as pending review. Pam smirked. I'll take that as a temporary victory. But she wasn't finished. The real battle was just igniting. Prescott had misjudged her. He expected compliance, a quiet nod, a removal of the cross, a return to business as usual. Instead, he faced a full-blown constitutional challenge. The air crackled with tension, every eye fixed on Pam. She had drawn a line, and Prescott faced a dilemma: cling to his shaky justification and risk humiliation, or backtrack without losing face. He wasn't one to retreat easily. Miss Bondi, he began, his tone measured. Courtroom rules exist for a reason. If I allow one form of expression, I open the door to all. Pam's lips pressed into a thin line. You mean like the wedding bands worn by half the attorneys here? Or the lapel pins you permit on government officials? Prescott's jaw clenched. Or how about the defense attorney you allowed to wear a pink ribbon for breast cancer awareness during a trial? Murmurs rose among the spectators. Prescott glared, but the damage was done. Pam had exposed his selective enforcement, a fatal crack in his armor. So tell me, Your Honor, she said, crossing her arms, why does this rule apply only to my cross? The turning point, Intelligence meets strategy. Pam's brilliance here wasn't just in her legal acumen, but in her strategic dismantling of Prescott's position. She didn't merely cite law, she wielded it like a scalpel, exposing inconsistencies and forcing the judge to confront his own contradictions. Her calm demeanor masked a ferocious intellect, one that thrived under pressure. She let the silence stretch, allowing the room to absorb the reality. Prescott had no answer. His fingers curled around the edge of his desk, his authority crumbling. Then came her final blow. "If you stand by this fine, Your Honor, I'll file an appeal before the ink dries, and trust me, this case will make headlines. A sitting judge fining a woman for wearing a cross in court. The higher courts will relish weighing in on that precedent." Prescott's nostrils flared. His ego battled cold reality. But Pam didn't look away. She let him stew, the delay amplifying his mistake. Finally, after an eternity, he exhaled sharply. "The fine is rescinded," he muttered. Pam smiled. "Much appreciated, Your Honor." But this wasn't just about a fine anymore, it was a message. Loud and resolute. Analysis, a clash of minds. Pam Bondi's intelligence is multifaceted, a blend of legal mastery, emotional restraint, and tactical foresight. She didn't react with anger or indignation, emotions that might have clouded her argument. Instead, she turned Prescott's impulsive ruling into a debate he couldn't win, leveraging her knowledge to shift the power dynamic. Her behavior reflects a seasoned professional who understands that true strength lies in preparation and principle, not bravado. Prescott, by contrast, reveals an intelligence hampered by rigidity. His initial decision was less about neutrality than control, a desire to assert dominance over a perceived slight. His failure to anticipate Pam's response speaks to a lack of adaptability, a critical flaw in a judge. Where Pam saw a battlefield of ideas, Prescott saw only his fiefdom, and his pride blinded him to the trap he'd set for himself. His eventual retreat was less a concession than a defeat, forced by a mind sharper than his own. The courtroom was no longer just a legal arena, it was a spectacle. The court reporter typed furiously, knowing this transcript would spread far beyond Tampa. The clerk, initially uneasy, now stole an admiring glance at Pam. Prescott shifted in his chair, shuffling papers as if to erase the moment, but it was indelible. Pam adjusted her blazer, the cross still gleaming, a quiet symbol of her victory. She turned to her client, a middle-aged business owner whose case had been overshadowed. He nodded, his respect for her deepening. This wasn't just about her anymore, it was about something greater. The ripple effect, from courtroom to public square. Outside, the reaction was swift. A reporter covering another case caught wind of the clash. And within an hour, a local news site blared, "Florida judge attempts to fine attorney for wearing cross. It doesn't go as planned." Pam's phone buzzed incessantly, colleagues, classmates, journalists, but she wasn't chasing headlines. She saw the bigger picture, a chance to challenge a precedent that could ripple through courtrooms nationwide. Would other judges follow Prescott's lead? Would attorneys self-censor to avoid confrontation? Pam wouldn't let that happen. By evening, the story had legs. A conservative commentator dissected it on air. Social media erupted in debate. Pam watched from her office. A producer from a national network already requesting an interview. She rubbed her temple, exhaling. This wasn't like her usual cases, corporate battles or criminal defenses. This was about personal freedom, about whether a judge's whim could strip it away. But Prescott wasn't done. As she left the courthouse that day, his parting glance, an unspoken challenge, lingered. She knew the fight wasn't over. The next morning, her assistant Lauren greeted her with a tablet and a grim expression. "You need to see this." The Florida Bar Association had issued a statement. Judges have the right to maintain decorum, while attorneys are afforded personal expression. Respect for presiding judges is key. We trust the judicial system to navigate these matters fairly. Pam's breath slowed. This wasn't neutral, it was a warning. Prescott was rallying institutional support, turning a courtroom loss into a bureaucratic counterattack. "There's more," Lauren said, handing her a printed document. Pam skimmed it. Attorney Pamela Bondi disrupted proceedings, challenged judicial authority inappropriately, and engaged in behavior unbecoming an officer of the court. She laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Unbecoming. That's rich." Lauren nodded. "It's retaliation. Plain and simple." Pam leaned back, tapping her fingers. Prescott wasn't just bitter, he was trying to rewrite the narrative, casting himself as the wronged party and Pam as the reckless agitator. It was a classic move: bury the issue in paperwork and flip the blame. Pam's counterstroke, turning defense into offense. Pam's intelligence shone again in her response. She didn't panic or retreat. "What's the process?" she asked, already strategizing. Lauren exhaled. "You've got 10 days to respond. If it moves forward, a panel of judges and senior attorneys reviews it." Pam almost smiled. Prescott thought he'd corner her with quiet pressure, but he'd miscalculated. This wouldn't stay private. She grabbed her phone. "If he wants to play games, let's play." She dialed Lisa Reynolds, a veteran journalist unafraid of judicial overreach. "Pam, I was just about to call you," Lisa said. Pam cut to the chase. "A judge filed a complaint against me for disrupting proceedings. Here's what really happened. He tried to fine me for wearing a cross. I stood my ground, and now he's punishing me through the system." Lisa's sharp breath crackled through the line. "A judge sanctioning you for calling out his abuse of power?" "Exactly," Pam said. "I'm running this," Lisa replied. "It'll be public by tomorrow, with analysts who won't hold back." Pam hung up, momentum shifting. She turned to Lauren. "Draft a public statement. Frame it as an attack on personal rights and judicial overreach. If he thinks he can punish me for standing up, imagine what he's done to those without a voice." Lauren nodded, her resolve hardening. Prescott had banked on silence, but Pam was about to make noise. By morning, her phone was a war zone of notifications. Lisa's segment had aired, and headlines screamed, "Florida judge tries to punish attorney for wearing cross. Now he's under fire." Legal analysts, left, right, and center, piled on. A Georgetown constitutional scholar called Prescott's logic blatant overreach with no legal standing. Another attorney dissected the dangerous precedent Pam had exposed. Then came the bombshell. The Florida Judicial Review Board would investigate Prescott's conduct for possible ethical violations. Pam leaned back, exhaling. This wasn't just her fight anymore, it was about every person stepping into a courtroom, wondering if their rights could vanish with a judge's pen stroke. Lauren handed her a phone. It was Prescott, outside the courthouse, cameras flashing. "I've always upheld this courtroom's integrity," he said stiffly. "My actions were for neutrality. I'll cooperate with the review." Pam smirked. "Neutrality? He's failing to save face." Lauren crossed her arms. "He's done." The review board's ruling loomed. A reprimand would humiliate Prescott and set a protective precedent. Even without it, he'd lost, his reputation shredded, his authority undermined. Every attorney in his courtroom would know this was the judge who tried to silence Pam Bondi and failed. She sipped her coffee, meeting Lauren's eyes. "We won." Lauren grinned. "Oh, I know." Pam had fought for more than herself. She'd shown that one person, standing firm, could shift the tide. Final analysis: intelligence and behavior in context. Pam Bondi's intelligence is a tapestry of legal expertise, emotional discipline, and strategic vision. She didn't just react, she anticipated, turning a minor fine into a national reckoning. Her behavior, calm, deliberate, unrelenting, reflects a mind that thrives in chaos, using reason as both shield and sword. She understood power's fragility and exploited it, not for ego, but for principle. Prescott's intelligence, while real, was rigid and short-sighted. His behavior, impulsive, then vengeful, betrayed a man more concerned with control than justice. He underestimated Pam, a fatal error rooted in arrogance rather than ignorance. His retaliation via the bar complaint was clever but doomed, exposing his pettiness to a wider audience. This wasn't just a courtroom drama, it was a lesson: never let power strip your rights without a fight. Pam's stand wasn't luck, it was the triumph of a brilliant mind over a flawed one.